Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating historical and mythical text, Chapter 85. And we're going to look at it to understand how human convenience silently, almost invisibly, transforms into absolute dependency. You know, whenever I approach a text like this, I like to put on my evolutionary historian hat. I'm always looking for the blueprints, the hidden architecture of how societies actually change. And what we have here in Chapter 85 isn't just an ancient myth. It is a profound, incredibly accurate metaphor for the exact psychological traps we face today. We're talking about digital algorithms, modern conveniences, and the systems that run our lives. Throughout this explainer, we are going to explore how unseen forces shape our habits. And here's the kicker. They don't do it through fear or intimidation. They do it through rewards.
Here is a quick look at where we're headed. First, we'll examine the illusion of discovery. Then, we'll look at some historical examples with merchants, warlords, and healers. Third, we'll break down the architecture of habit. Fourth is a really fascinating part about Valac and the missing ledger. Then we'll compare the high thrones versus the low ranks. And finally, we'll talk about breaking the hidden pattern.
Starting with Section 1, the illusion of discovery, and how power shifted from fear to reward. Our text drops us in right after the altars rose, a time when humanity genuinely believed they were simply stumbling upon lucky omens and impossible remedies. They thought they had just found a handy new tool. And that brings us to this absolutely crucial definition of the Unknowing Covenant. It is a bond without an open oath. Humans took the power and the demons took the pattern, with neither side speaking the full truth. This perfectly illustrates a system where leverage is traded for convenience, but nobody is actually sitting down to sign a formal fiery contract. The lower-ranked spirits, they didn't demand open worship. They were way smarter than that. They recognized that if you just give humans the power and the daily convenience they crave, you get to control the pattern of their behavior. It's an unspoken trade. Just think about how we interact with modern technology today, right? We get the free service, the instant answer, the endless scrolling feed, and in return, the system learns, adapts, and ultimately dictates our behavioral patterns.
Now, this quote here brilliantly illustrates the core evolutionary trap. Human desire did not need to be commanded if it could be rewarded. The low-rank spirits had this massive realization. They realized they didn't need to terrorize humans at all. They just needed to reward our existing behaviors. This is, quite literally, the definition of a psychological reinforcement loop, centuries before we even had a word for it. The text describes how a village would repeatedly return to the shadow simply because the shadow once saved its harvest. It's human nature. We repeat the actions that get us rewarded, and we entirely forget to stop and ask who or what is actually setting the terms of that reward.
Let's look at how this evolution actually played out. The old bargains, they were terrifying. They were obvious. They required names, seals, witnesses. You felt visible dread. You knew exactly what you were losing when you made that deal. But the new bargains? They completely flipped the script. They just hid behind convenience. They relied on repetition and results. They quietly taught humans which desires should be repeated. A fisherman returns to the exact same black stone every morning because it works. A modern professional returns to the exact same automated app every hour because it works. We don't see a burning sigil. We don't see a demonic contract. We just see results. And as the text explicitly warns us, results are the most persuasive mask of all. Moving into Section 2, merchants, warlords, and healers, and the deceptive helpfulness of unseen forces. To really grasp how deeply this dynamic infiltrated society, we need to look at the specific groups who fell into these psychological loops. The text breaks this down by looking at the absolute pillars of human civilization,
These are what the text calls the useful miracles. Merchants keeping 3 iron nails beneath their scales. Warlords intentionally sparing exactly 1 prisoner from every siege. Healers listening to strange voices to diagnose a dying patient. Poets finding immortality through unseen voices of inspiration. Even frightened mothers following dreams shaped like gentle birds. What is so wild about this is that all these people thought they were acting on their own personal genius. They thought it was their own intuition. They were completely oblivious to the fact that they were building a habit dictated by an external force. To the healer, the unseen force didn't feel evil. It felt like a medical intuition. To the poet, it was just inspiration. The spirits morphed into whatever specific form would not be feared by the user.
The merchants vehemently defended their bizarre little habits as the literal source of their wealth. Warlords actively invited this shadowy influence just to tilt the battlefield slightly in their favor. The text makes a really profound observation here. Humans gained wealth and proudly called it cleverness, while the demons gained repetition and called it access. This highlights a massive, glaring ego trap. Honestly, no fortress protects a hidden system better than a mortal ego that is entirely convinced it invented its own fortune.
But here is the historian's dilemma, and it's a tricky one. Not all of this was wicked. The healers and the poets, they were genuinely being helped. And that proves a terrifying point. Help, when it is poisoned slowly, is far harder to refuse than outright harm. This is the exact ethical dilemma of our modern age. Are these unseen influences, whether they be the spirits in this ancient text or the digital algorithms running our phones today, are they truly harmful, or are they just deceptively helpful? I mean, when a system saves a dying patient or drastically optimizes your daily schedule, it becomes almost impossible to reject it, even if you know it is slowly eroding your personal agency in the background.
This brings us to Section 3, the architecture of habit, moving from useful miracles to systemic leverage. Let's talk about the architects of this quiet, creeping takeover. These entities didn't care about human concepts of virtue or vice. They only cared about one thing: leverage. They weren't fighting for golden crowns. They were fighting to own the architecture of human daily life.
Enter Valac. Valac fed the Covenant by building systems that appeared incredibly useful right up until the exact moment everyone depended on them. He manipulated human greed and systemic collisions rather than effort-giving a direct command. Think about that. Valac didn't force a single human to do anything. He just shifted a stone over here, placed a shiny gold coin over there, and casually watched the human systems collide into each other. His ultimate genius was arrangement. And isn't this exactly how modern digital ecosystems operate? They arrange the environment. They design the interface so that our natural, subconscious impulses do all the heavy lifting for them, quietly cementing our dependency without us ever putting up a fight. Let's move to Section 4, Valac and the missing ledger and the hidden cost of outsourced agency. Because you have to ask yourself, if humanity was getting all this wealth and victory and convenience, what were these hidden forces actually extracting in return? What was the true price of this efficiency? Well, the Earl of Final Reckoning, an entity named Andromalius, eventually discovered the terrifying truth. He looked at the ledger and found that it wasn't gold or royal secrets being stolen. What was being stolen were names. Names disappearing from memory. The text notes a specific example where a judge literally forgot the very law he had sworn to uphold, right after winning a complex case through impossible, convenient evidence. The cost of outsourcing their struggles was the slow, silent erasure of their own memory and identity. So, the crucial takeaway here is the concept of the unpaid debt. Each bargain without a name collected a missing piece of human moral identity.
Humans were actively outsourcing their choices for the sake of convenience, and they were leaving behind a ledger written in absence, just empty signatures where souls had been systematically trained to abandon themselves. This is the profound ethical warning embedded in Chapter 85. Every single time we let an external system make a decision for us, just because it's easier or faster or more optimal, we aren't just saving time. We are paying for that convenience with a microscopic piece of our own human moral identity.
Another entity, Vassago, has this chilling realization that completely summarizes the situation. This is not possession. This is habit becoming law. When you allow an external system to shape your behavior for long enough, you don't even realize the exact moment you lose your autonomy. You aren't being possessed by a demon or mind-controlled by a computer chip. Nothing that dramatic. You have simply allowed your everyday habits to be curated by an external force until those curated habits quietly become the inescapable law of your entire life.
Section 5. High thrones versus low ranks. Let's look at the institutional reaction to these human markets. Because how did the established powers, the upper management, so to speak, react to this decentralized, grassroots manipulation of human habits? The text gives us a really fascinating look at what is essentially institutional panic. Look at this stark contrast between the two factions. The high thrones, like Baal, Paimon, and Belial, they demanded control, strict hierarchy, formal charters, and legal masks. It's a very top-down, rigid demand. But the low ranks? They had this invisible algorithm-like strategy. They didn't need crowns. They just needed rumors and usefulness. They hid behind convenience to become a habit. They just arranged to be needed through highly accurate rewards. The high thrones represent the old-school way of thinking, control through loud decrees, force, and visibility. But the low ranks realize the modern reality. You absolutely do not need a crown if you control the basic conveniences of everyday life. The lower ranks had learned the ultimate trick, how to profit massively without ever appearing. Which brings us to our final section, breaking the hidden pattern and the first mortal counterplot. Because thankfully, humanity wasn't completely blind to this. Our resistance actually formed, and it gives us a blueprint for reclaiming our agency today. Once they finally saw the cage they were in, they figured out how to dismantle it.
This resistance was called the Circle of Scribes and Widows. It was a group of scribes, widows, and failed priests who realized something incredibly important. They realized that while they didn't know the actual names of the demons, they could recognize the architecture of the trap itself. They knew they couldn't fight these unseen entities on a traditional battlefield with swords and shields, but they could simply refuse to play the game. As they put it, a sword can be misled, but a skeptic can starve a shadow. So how do we actually apply this wisdom? Here is the 3-step guide left by those mortals. Step 1. Compare the miracles. You have to notice when a supposed gift or convenience demands a repetition from you. Step 2. Recognize the narrowing. See how every single repetition of that habit slowly narrows your personal choice over time. And step 3. Refuse the victory. Break the inherited charm and actively refuse help that has too convenient a price. This is practically a survival manual for modern digital hygiene. You have to notice when an algorithm demands your attention every single day. You have to recognize how a personalized feed actively narrows your worldview. And sometimes, you just have to refuse the convenience. You literally have to choose the harder, slower, unoptimized path, simply to prove to yourself that your moral identity and your agency still belong to you.
Vassago, who we mentioned earlier, knew that secrecy was the system's greatest territory. He believed that a human who knows they are being shaped might still fall, but they fall arguing. And that is the point. The absolute greatest threat to any system of dependency, whether it's an ancient mystical covenant or a modern algorithmic feed, is simply being recognized.
A human who never knows they're being manipulated becomes nothing more than architecture for the system to use. But awareness? Awareness restores friction, and friction is where human agency lives.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought to consider about the invisible systems that we all rely on every single day. The text leaves us dangling right on the hook of a brand new war. But it's a war where the battleground isn't a field of swords. The battleground is the quiet space where usefulness transforms into worship. So ask yourself, can human agency truly exist when our habits are built by external forces? Or is the slow loss of our personal moral identity just the unavoidable cost of modern convenience? Think long and hard about that the next time a hidden system makes your life just a little bit easier. Until next time, keep questioning the systems around you.